Part 1. Morning Smoke. Under the early morning sun, no one noticed the faint smell of burning in the air. The smell that dock workers sometimes smelled but often ignored because it mixed with the smell of oil, sea salt, hot asphalt from the industrial area. Some dock workers even joked that someone must be smoking in the cargo area again. No one knew that the smoke was not from a cigarette, but from bags of fertilizer that were heating up on their own, a slow, silent, but deadly reaction. On deck, Captain Charles de Guillabon remained calm. He signed a few final papers, quickly asked his subordinate, "Is everything okay?" The mechanic simply replied, "Just a little smoke, sir. It will be put out soon." They did not open the hold to check further. They did not want to waste time. They did not want to dampen the cargo. They did not want to have to report a small incident that could slow down work. Meanwhile, just a few hundred meters away, convoys of refinery tankers were moving into the fueling area. Hundreds of workers were pouring into the production lines. They all believed one thing: Texas City was used to risk. They had lived next to flammable chemical tanks, pressurized oil tanks, and industrial plants for years. There had been minor accidents, a few tank explosions, a few local fires, but they had all been quickly extinguished. That belief reassured everyone more than necessary. By 7:45, the smoke in the hold was beginning to thicken. The temperature was rising, but no one could feel it because everything was still deep inside the sealed compartment. A young sailor said, "I think there's a crackling sound in there." But the supervisor waved his hand. "Let it suffocate. Seal it up." So they added a few more tarps, locked the hatch, and accidentally turned the entire cargo hold into a giant pressure cooker. And Texas City, a clear, peaceful morning, continued to function as if nothing had happened. No one knew that in just over an hour, the sun would be blotted out by a fireball hundreds of meters high, and the entire town would be shaken so much that people would think war had returned to America. Part 2. The First Smoke. Some port workers tried to get closer to assist the fire department, but the heat radiating from the hull of the ship made them back off. An old worker, who had worked here for more than 20 years, muttered, "This color of smoke is not good. If the ammonium nitrate changes color, it is very dangerous." But the noise from the port, the honking of tanker trucks, the compressor noise from the refinery drowned out his warnings. No one really heard. No one wanted to believe that the worst could happen on what seemed like a normal morning. At 8:20, the firefighters tried to open the hatch cover to inspect it directly. When they got a few inches open, a blast of hot steam came out as if opening a pressure cooker. One firefighter yelled and let go almost immediately. Around the hatch cover, the steel turned a deep red. A section of the deck began to buckle from the expansion, but they still thought that with more water and more foam they could control it. In the cabin, Captain Grandcamp tried to keep his composure. He ordered the French flag raised along with the slogan, "Save the Cargo," an international signal to put out the fire without damaging the cargo. It was a decision based on professional responsibility, but also a fatal mistake. It made the firefighters reluctant to take more drastic measures, like widening the hold or dumping the cargo. Meanwhile, beside the ship, tankers carrying gasoline, propane, and butadiene continued to enter and exit the area. They were told to stand still and wait. No one understood that with just one small change and explosion, a spark, a tunnel collapsed, the entire industrial district of Texas City would become the epicenter of the greatest disaster in American industrial history. At 8:25, the water around the ship began to shake slightly, as if a giant machine was roaring from deep below. Some people on shore saw the deck of the ship rise slightly, then fall, as if breathing. and amid the thick orange smoke, someone exclaimed, "This is no longer a fire." Part 3. The Explosion. I stood up, not understanding why my ears were ringing, why the ground beneath my feet was shaking as if it were still shaking. Smoke, dust, screams, and then I saw red-hot metal pieces falling from the sky like rain. But that was only the first moment after the explosion, the moment when Texas City was no longer itself. A huge column of fire erupted from the SS Grand Camp, creating a red-orange mushroom shape, like something out of a World War II bomb test photograph. The shock wave rippled across the water, through the industrial area, through ordinary residential areas. Concrete walls cracked, roofs blew out, windows collapsed as if struck by hundreds of sledgehammers at once. Trucks in the fueling area flipped over like toys. Chemical trains on nearby tracks derailed, lying on their sides, some leaking. Pipes at the refinery shook violently. Several safety valves popped open, spewing out white, steam-like gas that was toxic and flammable. One more spark and the whole thing would explode. Within seconds, a huge wave rolled over Galveston Harbor, tossing small boats at anchor. People on the pier were thrown into the water, many never to return. The nearby shipyard was smashed to pieces as if someone had struck it with a giant hammer. The city's hospitals, used to dealing with ordinary industrial accidents, were suddenly filled with hundreds of injured people, broken bones, burns, hearing loss, metal fragments. But no one understood what had really happened. 10-15 kilometers away, people thought there had been an earthquake. 30 kilometers away, many thought the refinery had exploded. Police, firefighters, and local militia rushed to the scene only to find a huge void where the ship had lain. No hull, no deck, no pier. Just a vast pit of fire, its heat rising as if it were burning the very air. Toxic orange and brick-red smoke filled the sky, making it difficult to breathe. A rescue worker later wrote, "The scene was like the moon, but glowing. Nothing was left intact. There was no sound but the sound of fire. There was no breath that did not smell of gunpowder and chemicals." And as the remaining pieces of the ship began to fall on neighboring factories, as oil storage tanks began to ignite from the spreading heat, Texas City did not yet know that this was only the first explosion. Hell had just opened. Part 4. The Sea of Fire Spreads. Fire brigades from neighboring towns rushed in, but the fire was too big, too hot, too chaotic. Water hoses sprayed into the sea of fire vaporized as soon as they touched hot steel. Fire trucks had their rubber tires melted, their windshields deformed. Some firefighters made it only a few feet before retreating, their smoke masks burning so hot they stuck to their skin. They were no longer fighting the fire, they were just trying to stop it, knowing they were powerless. Inside the industrial park, oil tanks exploded, creating secondary fireballs. Each time a tank exploded, the ground shook like an earthquake. Hundreds of pounds of steel fragments flew hundreds of feet, embedded in roofs, through walls, and into the molten asphalt. At a butadiene storage facility, the flames flared violently and turned blue, a sign that the chemical reaction was getting out of control. A Dow chemical engineer shouted from the sea of smoke, "Fire's eating into the east pipeline. If the gasoline catches fire, the whole thing is dead." But no one could do anything. Another column of fire rose so high that people in Galveston, more than 15 kilometers away, could see its light reflected off the ocean. In the city center, chaos reached a fever pitch. People tried to evacuate, but the streets were littered with rubble. Power poles were broken. Cars were burned out. Shops, restaurants, gas stations, all were blown to pieces or smoldering. A mother ran with her child in her arms into the street, smoke from the factory blanketing them like mist, making them cough and collapse. A man tried to turn back to find his wife in his half-collapsed house, but rescuers pulled him out. "Don't go in! It's about to collapse again." Down at the port, the wind changed direction. Fire from the oil fields swept across the pier like a firestorm. The high flyer, which should have left the night before, was lying across the drainage channel, carrying more than 900 tons of ammonium nitrate and 1,800 tons of sulfur. The crew had abandoned ship, but the hull was now so hot that the paint was blistering and peeling off like burned skin. A port engineer saw the scene and paled. If the high flyer catches fire, this is just the beginning. The flames from the oil tankers spread, licking the ship's mooring lines, crawling along the waterline. Black smoke swirled around the deck. Some rescue workers tried to push the ship away with tugboats, but the heat wave caused the tugboat's engines to malfunction. The hull of the high flyer exploded with pop-pop sounds like firecrackers, signaling that the pressure inside was increasing. In the sky, ash and toxic smoke formed a layer of black clouds so thick that the streetlights had to be turned on at noon. The sun had almost disappeared. Texas City now looked like it was being swallowed into the mouth of a fire monster, and that monster was heading straight for the second chemical tanker. And everyone understood. If the high flyer exploded, there would be no more Texas City. Part 5. The White Night of Texas City. That night, Texas City was like a battlefield without boundaries. Black smoke continued to rise from the ruptured oil tanks, drifting for miles. The smell of chemicals, hot asphalt, and burning metal mixed together, forcing rescuers to wear wet towels to breathe. Fire trucks continued to arrive from cities hundreds of miles away, but many teams could only approach from a distance because the heat in the port area was so intense. The tires of fire trucks melted after just minutes of standing still. In the city center, schools were turned into ambulance stations. Desks became hospital beds. Volleyball courts became places for victims to wait for first aid. Every time the doors opened, the wind carried hot ash and the smell of smoke, making everyone's eyes sting. Doctors and nurses worked continuously for more than 20 hours, their hands shaking with exhaustion, but they continued to bandage, administer painkillers, and try to keep survivors from fainting from panic and injury. But the real nightmare happened at 1 a.m. on April 17. From a distance, some firefighters heard the metallic groaning from the high flyer, the sound that foreshadowed what everyone feared, but no one dared to speak out. Just seconds later, there was a flash of white light, and then everything exploded in a giant fire. A second explosion tore through the night of Texas City, so powerful it shattered windows and buildings that seemed unbreakable. Steel containers were thrown into the air, falling for miles, leaving half-meter deep craters in the streets. The shock waves swept through the neighborhood again, blowing down houses already cracked by the first explosion. When the light flashed, I thought the sun had just risen in the middle of the night, a young firefighter later recalled. Then I was blown away. When I got up, I couldn't see where I was going, just a red sky. Within minutes, what was left of the port was gone. Steel towers were blown like wire. Oil pipelines hundreds of meters long were bent like straw. The flames from the high flyer sparked more fires scattered across the city, forcing firefighters to abandon the spots they were trying to control and run to other places. When dawn finally arrived, soft light spilling over the devastated city, Texas City residents emerged from their shelters, looking at each other with blank eyes. The fire alarms were gone. The sound of industrial machinery was gone. There was only the wind blowing through the shattered frames of buildings and the clanging of metal falling from buildings that had burned all night. The once bustling streets were now covered in gray ash. The Grand Camp's hold was gone, just a deep black hole like a giant wound in the ground. Further away, neighborhoods were so destroyed that it was impossible to distinguish between road, wall, and floor. In the field hospital, doctors used three colors of crayons: red, yellow, and blue to mark the victims. There was no time to ask for names. Many lay motionless, covered in white sheets, in the hope that someone would come and identify them. But some bodies were beyond recognition. So many people had been caught in the blast that no piece of cloth or identifying object could be found. Then, as the missing persons list was hastily scribbled on a wooden board in front of City Hall, the names were familiar friends, co-workers, neighbors, even children who had run out to play the morning before. A witness, standing next to the rubble that had once been his home, said through tears, "We didn't just lose people. We lost the city. We lost a normal morning that we will never have again." Part 6. The Legacy of the Fire. When the last of the smoke cleared and the flames no longer filled the sky, Texas City was left with only ash and questions. Federal investigators, Navy SEALs, chemical engineers, and industrial safety experts were called in. They walked among the twisted steel, charred pipes, and deep holes to find the cause, but, in truth, no complicated mystery was needed. The ammonium nitrate on the SS Grand Camp was transported as if it were just fertilizer, without warning labels. Many of the bags were contaminated with oil and flammable materials during loading. The crews were not trained in the thermal reactions of chemicals. The smothering by sealing an old, outdated procedure turned the ship into a giant pressure cooker. And around it, a huge industrial complex was built like dominoes. Oil storage, chemical storage, gasoline tanks, butadiene pipelines, all placed close together as if defying fate. The final investigation report read dryly. No safety regulations were properly followed. But for the people of Texas City, those words could not describe the deeper truth. The disregard for safety had become habitual, and the price was in human lives. In the wake of the disaster, the United States was forced to rewrite entire procedures for transporting ammonium nitrate, regulating the loading and unloading of hazardous materials, designing storage facilities, building automatic fire alarm systems, and harbor safety standards. Today's regulations, from tank spacing to chemical labeling and firefighting training, bear the imprint of Texas City, a lesson written in broken steel and ashes. The town was rebuilt, new houses were built, factories were reopened, the port was modernized. But beneath the concrete lay the indelible memory. Near the spot where the SS Grand Camp had been moored, a black steel monument stood tall, sharp, like a piece of metal that survived the explosion, forever imprinted with pain. The memorial board listed 581 names, but there were still numbers that were never written. Those who disappeared without bodies. Those blown away beyond recognition. Older people in Texas City sometimes tell their children about that morning. They say the memory isn't the explosion, it was too fast, too strong, too bright to remember. What they remember is the moment after, an eerie silence, as ash fell like gray snow from the black sky, as a city stood staring at the flames, not knowing how much it had lost in a matter of seconds. A small spark, a sealed hold, and a city goes up in flames like a match. Texas City's legacy is more than just numbers or engineering lessons. It's a stark reminder that the greatest disasters sometimes come not from natural hazards, but from the things people take for granted.